Okay, welcome everybody this morning. My name is Charlie Taylor. I'm one of the continuing education consultants at KDLA. I'll be here facilitating the webinar, helping out today. Today is time management for library supervisors. And just have a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions for our presenter, you can use the chat pod. They're in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It'll always be down there, and she'll be we'll be watching it for you. Both of us will be watching it if any questions come in. Also, if you have any technical issues, I'll be monitoring the chat for that, so go ahead and let me know if there's any issues with the slides or the sound or anything. You'll also be able to download your own copy of these slides at the end of the webinar. And a reminder that this is being recorded, and it will be available on our archived webinars page within 1 week. It's usually sooner than that, but we give ourselves a week's time just in case. And so just looking at our poll, again, it looks like most people feel pretty good about their time management skills. Nobody's desperate and nobody's an expert, so that's good. So let me go ahead and change our screen over for our presenter. I'd like to welcome Sandra Causey. She is the new director at the Oldham County Public Library. She's come here from South Carolina. So let's give a big, warm Kentucky welcome to Sandra. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for setting all this up. Thanks everybody who has taken some time out of their day to hopefully learn a little something about time management. So I am a little bit of a naturally unorganized person. So when I got my first management job, I decided that I was going to, figure this out. It felt like everything was kind of coming at me, that I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants most of the time. So I decided to, do a lot of research and things like that to kind of figure out what I could do to really get a system together that takes care of itself. So a lot of it was more about changing sort of the traditional ways of looking at things like scheduling and how the systems in your organization work. I think a lot of times it has to do with building in systems of preventative maintenance, but also building in systems so that you have to build in the time to check on these systems and make sure they're actually working. Because what happens is we get so caught up in putting out fires as supervisors that we lose the time to do the ongoing tasks that we need to do to keep up the preventative maintenance. So just a little idea of how this can help. If you waste even an hour a week, on just random tasks, then that's a week a year of unused time. And a lot of times it can even be an hour a day that we're just putting out these fires that we could put systems in place to prevent. So if that's the case, an hour a day equals 6 weeks a year. And if you and your team are having these same kind of drawbacks, you're talking about months and months of time a year that could go towards, developing more patron services, doing more programming, anything like that. So it is really a very useful thing to learn. And I will keep my eye over there, so if you guys have any questions, of course, feel free to let me know. So by implementing some of these techniques, these are a lot of things that really can help you out in the future. You can save hours of work, time that's focused on activities that could be reevaluated. For example, at one of the branches that I was a manager at, when I went in to take over, I found that when the way that they were recording their times for programs each month was that they would take a flyer of the program and they would write the notes on the back of each flyer, and then they would turn in a stack of flyers, so maybe 30 or 40 flyers to the manager. And then she would go through and manually write out all of these things. And so basically it took hours and hours a month for her to just get the programming information. Now that's a little of an extreme example, but how many systems do we have in our libraries that we still use just because we've always used them? And so that was an example of that. So when I came in, I had it, all I did was create a spreadsheet and had them put it in directly. So all I had to do, took me 5 seconds to look at the number at the end of the month, make sure the spreadsheet wasn't messed up or anything, and do that. So even just in that little way, we ended up saving a ton of time. You can reduce your stress over losing or missing an important email. I can't tell you how many people I know, probably most people, whose email inbox has non-ending. You can never find the bottom of it. Now with email, one of the things is a lot of times those emails represent tasks that need to be complete. So maybe you leave them in your inbox or you file them into folders, but then of course there's that inevitable moment when you reach your storage max. So we'll talk a little bit today about ways that you can prevent that issue and still have the peace of mind that all the stuff you need is still available. Also, by implementing some of these things, having a great system, you get a peace of mind that if you're not there, that everything's going to be fine. The system really builds itself. You're there to help. You're there to put out fires. You're there to kind of navigate. But when you're not there, everything will smoothly run itself, and everyone will know exactly what they need to do in an emergency situation, all of that. I know it's pretty common, especially in medium-sized to smaller systems, for there to be this idea of sort of, it's almost like we're all on the same team, we all pitch in and do everything. And, well, actually, that's true and that's wonderful, but in a lot of ways, that ends up causing a lot of problems, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you'll always have a clean, tidy space. It'll be an optimization of time. Really a great way to lower stress because you'll actually end up finding that you have a lot of time well in advance of deadlines. Usually I end up getting, at this point, in the past I've been at a place where it's like deadline, 5 minutes, and I just got it in. But now I generally will end up calling, say if I have filings to do or if I need to meet with someone, I'm calling them 3 or 4 months, and they're like, wow, this isn't even on our radar right now. Why are you, So in a way, you can even be too well time managed, I suppose. So it gives you time for those bigger ideas and projects that you've always dreamed of doing but never had the time. And then, of course, in the long term, you'll have happier staff and happier managers because so many of these systems will take care of themselves. Now, in the short term, you're going to aggravate a lot of people probably because that is something that's very common with change, and we'll talk a little bit about change management as we go through as well. So if you want right now, if you just write down a couple of examples of those kinds of little inefficiencies in your department. Ones, sometimes you see them and you just ignore them because you know they're going to cause a lot of heartache in your staff. So go ahead and write a few of those down if you can. You don't have to share them or anything, just so that you can start thinking about that. So here are some of the common time management mistakes. Multitasking, I'm sure you guys have all heard time and again about how when you multitask, they've done studies and stuff with people with multitasking. You're always less efficient. You think you're doing a great job. They've had people where they were doing driving on a simulator and doing different things, and they would almost always get in a wreck, a lot more than if they weren't multitasking. So I'm one of those people, I like to flip tasks a lot, but instead of trying to do more than one task at once, I just purposefully move from one task to the next. I just might do 20-minute increments instead of a 3-hour, giant long-term project or something. So your to-do list is in your head. You're like, I need to do that, 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 and that. Make sure you get it down somewhere. And that's one of those things that seems really obvious, but I know for me, especially early on, I was like, I'll just remember to do that. But now I always keep Post-it notes with me. So if I'm at a desk or anywhere, I write it down so it can go into my master to-do list. Another common mistake is not having a system of checks and balances, because basically you want to make sure that everything is getting covered all the time and it's not dependent on necessarily one person's to-do list or one person's responsibility, because what if that person is out and gone? So we'll talk a little bit more about ways that you can do that as well. A lot of managers tend not to give themselves enough time to actually do management or delegate. So a lot of managers think, I've got to do it myself. So you get kind of an idea of people who either are micromanaging or they take way too much on themselves and don't delegate. If you don't give yourself enough time to manage, and that's something that is a lot more difficult to implement later. So as you're training your new managers, making sure that they have enough time to learn the ins and outs and the ropes of managing at the beginning, and then you can slowly take the time away. But if you start at my first branch manager job, I started out by trying to be, I'm just going to go in there and I'll be on the desk for 6 hours a day, and then of course I had no time to actually do the management work. So then I had to pull it back, and then I had to sort of reestablish a relationship that they didn't, because they kind of get dependent on however much time you're actually spinning out there on the desk, and then they think you're taking something away from them. So it's important to develop that at the beginning. If your physical space isn't organized, then that is always going to make your life more difficult. You're always going to be digging for things. I've known people with desks that look like this one here, and if you ask for something, they're like, oh, it's organized chaos, but is it really, is the question. Do you lose things sometimes? The things accidentally slip through your fingers. You find a piece of paper 2 months later, and you're like, oh, no, I was supposed to take care of that. So it's good to kind of keep yourself organized that way. And once again, we'll talk about some ways you can do that. Having checkpoints or pointers in your system is very important, because basically what these do, these are the constant reminders. Now, what you want is, you may have your tasks or your information on in numerous places. Like you may have 3 or 4 lists. Maybe, for example, I have a list that's just for maintenance projects. I have a list for long-term projects, and I have a list for other projects. Now, obviously, I don't want all of those on my master to-do list, because that would make it a super-duper long list, because maybe the project ideas that I have has 150 ideas on it, but the maintenance list has 50. We don't want to put those all into one list, because then it becomes something that's unmanageable. But on my regular checklist, I might have something that says check the project's checklist, and then that'll be built in weekly. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself to kind of gauge where you're at in your self-management and your time management. And Jennifer, if you had a question, feel free to go ahead and put it through. I'll definitely answer anything. So how do you currently keep up with your staff performance? And I'm not talking about the one that's required by your institution, or the one that your board has said about your annual reviews, but how do you keep up with those day-to-day things? How do you track those patterns? Because when we're talking about staff performance, we're talking about, we don't want to get angry with someone for just having a bad day, or, call someone out because they just made one little mistake. But we're looking for patterns, right? So how do you keep up with those patterns? How do you keep up with all the maintenance issues? And once again, not just initially setting it into motion to say there's a leak in the roof and we need to get fixed, but how do you follow up on it again and again to make sure that that project is actually getting done? And that has to do with whether you're a director or a manager, anything like that. How are you making sure that that's following up? If you're reporting to a county government, how often do you have it to where you're making sure you're following up? How do you keep up with your goal setting and your staff's goal setting? How do you capture your long-term ideas? How often do you review them? How do you keep up with those repetitive tasks that happen again and again? Not just one thing like an annual filing like the directors have to do, but what about checking on your projects list? Where checking on your staff to make sure that they're keeping up with their projects? How do you follow up on those communications and deadlines, yours and for your staff? Because when you're a manager, you're not just in charge of yourself, you're in charge of everybody who's under you. So I don't like using that term, took me a second. How do you identify problems and fix them? And how do you track what your patrons are saying? This is one of the biggest ones. We like to do surveys and other surveys and all that, but a lot of times when we do surveys, we're only getting that niche population, the one that is always online, or the one that will actually take the time to write it out. So there's actually some really great ways to kind of start tracking what patrons are saying day to day. Okay, now into the nitty-gritty, the fun stuff. So first, let's start with managing your email. Since about 2014, when I discovered this style of email management, I have never had an item in my email inbox. Now, I might have, well, like currently right now in my other folder, I have 3,545 emails, but in my inbox, I have none. So this is actually based on Dave Crenshaw. He is a time management expert. And so what he says is that you should always keep your email inbox empty, which sounds terrifying, and that you should only have, for him, he says, one resources folder in your inbox. For me, I use this here, which I call in process, which you can see highlighted in red to the left side of the page. Now, this is showing you on the desktop for Outlook, but you can use this method with other emails as well. Anyone that allows you to do folders or tags. So in my in process, as I read every email every day, it does not stay in the inbox. It either goes into the in process or the processed. So my in process is things that I need to follow up on. So for example, but well, that I need to follow up on, but aren't as important enough for me to like move on to an actual to-do list. So someone might send me an email saying, oh, your computers are going to be shipped this week. So I might move it in process so that later in the week when I look at it, I can be like, oh, yeah, those computers are on their way. That way I don't have to formally put it on a to-do list and then make my to-do list way longer than it is. If I read it and it's a one-time thing, like say I sent an email to a staff member and they just acknowledged it, I can move that right over into process. That way I never delete emails. I never, ever, ever delete emails. I have a record of every email since 2014. Now, the great thing is that if I need to access those emails, I've never had a problem finding old emails because you just go to your process box and then you just search it. It has a great search feature in Outlook. So if I'm like, okay, well, I was talking to someone about magazines, so then I can just go to my process box and search the word magazines, or if I know who it is. Now, one great thing about this system is that you have two options with Outlook and with other email systems. Most of them have a similar thing. You can actually either auto-archive or you can export these. And if you would like instructions on how to do either of those, please just shoot me an email afterwards and I can send you detailed instructions. It's not difficult at all to do those. And so what I do is I actually just export that folder in 6-month increments. And when you do, you can actually just open it in there and it will be at the bottom of the box. You can actually still search those old folders and you can have them stored in there as long as you need to. So we have a question. What about those messages that come to your inbox from listservs that you are on, announcements from sites such as bookstores and ALA in regards to keeping your inbox empty? Well, I do the same thing. I read them, and then I put them in process. Sometimes something, especially from listservs, I may stick it in process temporarily, or I may move that idea over to a to-do list if it's something I want to research more or implement. But it really is up to you. Some people just want to delete all that, but I like to be able to access everything. Now, obviously, now and then we get that whole Nigerian Prince email or whatever you want to call it that's obviously a scam, or it's got some kind of weird email address. Now those I go right to the deleted items and don't even open them. But you can judge that. If you're getting a lot of spam, you may want to just delete that directly. But the point is you're going to have to touch every one of those emails anyway. Just do your best that you only have to go through them once, because I remember one of the reasons I started doing this was in around 2013, 2014, I hit my 1 gigabyte limit of mail, and then it took me like 3 days to go through because I was like scared to delete anything because I had deleted stuff before and then ended up needing it later, especially when you're a manager and it's so important that you're tracking, what you do. You said, I assigned you this task and they say you didn't and you had to delete that email, so to make sure that you're on the right page. Great question. Also, if you see here on the right, and we'll talk about this one in the next one, if you decide to do your checkpoints through your calendar, you can actually do color coding with that, and you can do that for your meetings or your repetitive tasks. Now what you see here is kind of an expansion of that. I used to keep 2 calendars. I would keep an Outlook calendar that would pop up on my computer that would give me those repeating tasks. As you can see the bottom one, I had to check our ADP was our pay clock system, or time clock system. So as you see, something would pop up every week saying, make sure you check your ADP. If I had to do training every quarter, I would put, make sure you do your training, desk schedules. These are the repetitive tasks. So at the top calendar is the one I use now, which is a Google Calendar. The reason I like it is because the blue parts are actually a calendar that I share with my staff, so they always know where I'm at all times. Your staff will often feel left out or like you're not connected to them if somehow you're not constantly communicating, which when you're in a very small place with maybe one branch and you're constantly with them is one thing, but if you have more than one branch, and I do go out to the branches on a monthly basis, but if I was in a place that had 10 or 15 branches, I wouldn't be able to do that. We have 2 branches here, so you can really just build this calendar. So the blue part on the Google Calendar are the ones that my staff see. And the other ones are my repeated things that you can see is a similar system to the ones on the bottom calendar. So on Fridays, for example, I make sure to back up my files. Now we have a cloud backup and we have an internal backup, but just to be safe, once again, I like to always have those checks and balances in there. I always back up our files, like our QuickBook files and budget files and stuff every Friday. It takes me 30 seconds, but it's there and I do it. I check my projects to make sure that anything that I want to move onto next week's to-do list from my larger projects tab or maintenance list will be there. And then every Tuesday, as you can see in the yellow, I always review the budget in detail. So once again, all that is built in. And then on Wednesdays, I write info for the staff newsletter to make sure that, once again, I am there. I don't feel like some kind of distant person. One thing I've found over and over again, and have heard numerous people who deal with management say, is that if you're disconnected with your staff, and which can be really easy to do when you do have to enforce rules or you have so many other things to do that you can't talk to them on a daily, every one of them on a daily basis, is that it's so easy for them to kind of project onto you their worst fears. So, for example, if some kind of news is released to them in an uncontrolled manner, the first thing they're going to think is my job in jeopardy or something like that. So it's just really important to keep yourself kind of in the forefront and really open with them. And we have found that this staff newsletter is a really great way to do that. The staff always read it and come back and talk to me about it, while also having that calendar there so they can see where I am and what I'm doing. So another thing that you can do is, for example, in the bottom calendar on Mondays I had a daily folder. So what it is I built into this daily folder where I would do my work log, my list, and all that. Make sure that you're always building in a thorough walkthrough of your property onto this calendar. A big one every month, a small one weekly. A lot of times I'll grab a random staff member to walk through. It can be anyone from a page to the assistant director, because everyone's going to see something different. But that's a way to get those new ideas flowing and to make everybody feel involved. You can build anything into this that you feel is important. Like I said, looking at a master to-do list, doing your maintenance issues, anything like that. Now, to-do lists can be troublesome. I've seen lots and lots of systems, from having a notebook where you put in sticky notes. So you're writing these sticky notes and you put them in a notebook, and then when you're done with them, you throw them away, to what we have on here, which is a priority checklist, the one on the right that says to do. That would be one where you prioritize it, and then you delete it as you use it. The top left would be batching, which is where you combine different types into one category. And then the bottom left, which would be an app. So different apps that you can try: Wunderlist, Evernote, Trello, Workflowy. You can even just use Google Drive, or you can use notebooks, Word documents. I mean, it's endless. Everyone has been trying to solve this problem for ages. So Dave Crenshaw, the one who I was talking about earlier, he talks about how do you record your one-time tasks, which would be on your to-do list, versus your repetitive tasks, which you could put on an Outlook calendar, or like as I do on a Google Calendar. Stephen Covey, who I think he was the one who wrote the, what was it, I can't remember. Anyway, I'm sure everyone's heard of his book. He talks about doing something like 4 to-do lists, one called important and due soon, one called important and not due soon, one is not important and due soon, and one is not important and not due soon. Now that's a lot of lists. So that you need to be looking at 7 something for highly motivated people or something. Wonder if Charlie, yeah, there you go, 7 habits of highly effective people. Thank you, Charlie. Chris Croft, who's another one, he talks about having another person who's an expert in time management, talks about having a master to-do list and a daily to-do list. And I will tell you, I did try that before, and I think it really could work well. It didn't end up being my ideal. But the idea is that you can try all these out. You can work with one, work with the other, so you find the one that works best for you. So I did try the master and daily for a while, and it did work for a while, but I had to evolve that for my personally. So I'm going to show you guys kind of the system I use now that's evolved from all these ideas. So I use a completely digital log and calendar. Now, it does have some drawbacks because none of them are perfect. One being that I, in general, can't carry this with me. It does live on my work computer, but since I spend a lot of time on my work computer, it's fine. And what I can do is, when I'm not at work, I just take notes about it. And I can't access my computer from home. So if I needed, in an emergency situation, to see this from home, I could. but in general, everything's kind of marked on here. So this, as you can see, is an example of a master and a daily to-do list together. Now, what I kind of developed a few years ago was a concept of using a daily log as a daily to-do list. So what it does is I have everything in my list that needs to get done. And so the first way that I did this was kind of go through all of the stuff that needed to get done, and I'll give you guys a list of where you can start with that at the end of this webinar. And I put it all into a calendar like this on Excel. And as I went on, so every morning when I first get to work, the first thing I do is I look at this and I look at my Google Calendar. I'm looking at these two places. Anything that I need to do that day is on that list. If I don't have time to do it that day, it gets moved to the next day. So I may have stuff filled in for 2 or 3 days ahead. Some of it's not very urgent. Some of it is urgent. If it's really urgent, I'll highlight it in red. And once I complete the task, I highlight it in yellow so that I know it's complete. So in this Excel document, as you can see across the bottom, I have every month of the year. I do it according to fiscal year right now, but you can do it for calendar year or fiscal year. And basically, I just have all of those months filled out, and then I have whatever important other checkpoints I need. So for example, if right now I have a long-term and short-term projects list. At this time, I had an ideas list, a deadlines list, facilities list for urgent things like a leak, or for other things that weren't as urgent, like I would like to replace some carpet. So you can really just build in whatever's important to you. Now what I do is on this, as a director, I have things that I want to talk to the board. So I have board meeting this month, manager meeting this month. So as those items come up throughout the month, I have one place to stick everything that I'm going to present at the board meeting, or things that I want to tell them during my director's report. But you can use this, like I said, I've used the same system as both a manager and a director, and it works great for every level. So, for example, on this one, this was back when I was preparing this for South Carolina Library Association conference. As you can see, on October 26th, I worked on a master schedule and sent it to supervisors. I did program observations. I went and covered another branch. I put together music for a puppet show. And then at the bottom, you can track anything that you would like. For example, I wanted to track for a few months how many hours I was actually spending on the circulation desk, because I wanted to make sure I was getting out there enough. So I would put that at the bottom for a few months to kind of track my own behavior. Now, as you can see on this one, you could use this daily list along with a master task list of things that aren't quite as urgent, that you can look at weekly and move from one list to the other. I have found that it works more efficiently for me personally if I just leave it on the one list and I just move it day to day as needed and then highlight it when I'm done. One of the great things about this is that this is also a searchable document. So for example, a few years ago, the collection manager for the library I worked in for the whole system, she emailed me and she said, when did you guys move your graphic novel collection? Because I want to see if it affected circulation. So I went into my log here, which works as both a log and a record of everything you've done and accomplished. And I just searched for graphic novels, and I said, oh, that was, March 28th of last year. And she had an exact date, but I didn't have to remember it. So it's out of my head, onto the paper. So, record keeping, the bane and joy of all librarians. So this is actually the amount of files that I usually keep. So when I usually move into a place, I'll inherit something like, at the job where this file cabinet was, I actually inherited about 30,000 folders that I had to go through from the last 30 or 40 years. When I got here to Oldham County, it was about 5 file cabinets plus 4 other file drawers, so probably about 50 to 60,000 papers that, luckily I had great office staff here to help me with that. But we went through our records room, I went through all the paperwork, and I got it down to about 1 drawer in my office, and then of course we have our long-term files that have to be kept according to records retention rules. But those are in a different place. But I'm not clogging my personal files in my office up with those. So the things you can ask yourself, is there another copy somewhere in the system? For example, if you have a human resources department, did they have a copy of it? Do you really need to have a physical copy of it? If they have the original copy and you just have a scanned copy in your own personal files, is that good enough? Do you need to have a physical one? Can you keep a digital version? And as you're thinking about how you're tracking things, do you still need to track it on paper? And think about how you can solve different problems. So for example, build in an annual processing of your long-term filing. So if you are filing something weekly or monthly, build in something at the beginning of each year or the beginning of each fiscal year or something that gives you a chance to do that, so that 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, suddenly it got ahead of you and you keep buying filing cabinets or something so that you can have enough room for all of this. Make sure you're backing up your information. If you don't know yourself, ask your director. Ask if you have a department for IT. Ask them, how is our information backed up? So a few years ago, I was told by someone in the IT department at a place that I worked that, oh yeah, your files are backed up every week. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. Luckily, I still backed up my files and now I do even more after this happened. So one day, I go into my computer, and all my files are gone. And being a person who doesn't have a ton of physical files, that means almost everything was digital. So I called them over, and they're like, oh, we had your stuff stored on a server at your old branch, and we never moved it to your new branch, so we thought you weren't there anymore, and that we had moved your stuff, and we didn't, so we just deleted everything. So there's always those weird accidents that will happen, so make sure that you're backing yourself up as well. It's really inexpensive to get a hard drive nowadays. I just have a fireproof box that sits in my drawer, back it up every Friday, make sure that it's safe. Managing your statistics and other information can be done very easily digitally. If you have an intranet, you can do it through there. If you if you just have a box on your circulation computers where they can stick it in, or you can just have a place where they physically write it and then they put it in digitally at the end of the day. Make sure that you talk to KDLA about records retention if you have any questions, because there is a lot of interesting rules about that. I'm sure you've all dealt with it at some point. I'm going to talk about the comments log a little bit. This was something I started a couple of years ago that has been the most effective way of getting patrons that use your library to get their comments. And basically what it is, it was a log that we started out as a physical log, writing it down. And it's just an anonymous, every time a kind of an off-the-cuff comment came from a customer, something like, oh, I love this library, the staff would just write, I love this library. They wouldn't put any other information, just whatever they heard said. And it was just a great way for me to track, because people would be like, I hate your computers, or I love your computers, or you always have enough computers, or you never have enough computers. And so it was just a way to kind of get that information without any details, without any kind of judgment, nothing like that, to me so that I could make sure that I was hearing what they actually said. Your staff are the best ears you have. Now, if I told the staff, if it was a comment that was a little controversial or something, you bring it directly. I mean, we don't want that stuff written down. And I'd pull the log every day too, but boy, did the staff get into it to the point where after a year, we had about 2,000 comments. People, when they get into it, when your staff get into something, they just get so excited about it. But it was just a great way to learn about what was going right and what was going wrong in our library. And for them to get that information themselves and be able to feel like they were sharing what they were hearing and that we were listening. So there's a lot of places where you can kind of develop a one-stop shop. That includes having an everyone or a public folder or a shared folder. Some places have that. A lot of people who are like smaller places might use a Google Drive or an online file sharing service, or an intranet is always a good place. Now the big thing about this is just make sure you have someone in charge of keeping it cleaned up, because I know after 5 or 10 years those public or shared folders will get very, very, very messy. So make sure you have someone who you know is in charge of that and keeps that cleaned up. So managing schedules and calendars can be a challenge, because once again, I found myself in the past when I'm in charge of calendars that you're chasing people down to verify their vacations, or you're doing different things like this. Another thing is that people will, if they don't know everyone else's schedules, everyone will want the same week off because it's the week all the kids are out of school. So how do you build that in to where you take the responsibility off yourself, chasing them down and telling them they can't take that week off, and then seeing kind of in advance what they can and can't do. So what I developed a few years ago is this method, which is not my personal. I've seen other people use this kind of thing with physical calendars. I just had moved it onto an online format. What happened with the physical calendars I found is that the managers would require that people to write them in pencil, and then magically some stuff would get erased and someone else's stuff would get put in, and then it would get very confusing, and it'd be a he said, she said kind of thing. So if you have an online calendar that your staff can use, it works very well. Or if you just have a centralized person, like you, for example, and people email you the time off that they're interested in. So what I have then that works well. So what I have here is, this was a SharePoint calendar. And so the way that we could use this one was that staff themselves could put in their annual leave or sick leave, or if they wanted to say as you can see on Thursday, Primrose was going to Dawkins Middle School lunch to do a presentation. So anything from the staff side, not really programming, but anything from the staff side, outreach, that kind of thing, would be put in here by the staff members. So once again, it's not your responsibility to do this. The staff could do this. They could not edit anyone else's. They only had permission to edit their own. Now, once again, if you don't have something like an intranet and you want to just use a Google Calendar, it'd probably be better to have a central staff member to put it in and out, and people would just email them that. And it takes a little more time, but still it's clean. So what happens is when someone had to go into our time clock system, they would go in and they would request the time off, and then they put it on here. I would get an email from the time clock system saying that they had done that time. I check my schedule. It looks good. I put approved on both the calendar and the time clock system. But then I saw, for example, on Friday, I had 2 people off, and I knew no one else could take off. So I put no more requests that day. That will stop your other staff members. They know that they cannot ask off that day. And that prevents a lot of problems, especially if you don't have paid leave for your part-time staff. And there's been I know in a lot of places there's kind of an idea, if you don't give paid leave for your part-time staff, it's almost like the trade-off of that is they can take off, it's like an unwritten rule, they can take off how much time that they want. And so this kind of prevents a lot of those problems. So we have a question over here. Does anyone have any guidance on how far ahead you allow staff to reserve time off? I demand 2 weeks notice, but how many months ahead do you let your staff reserve time? So I'm with you. I usually say 2 weeks ahead of time. Like basically what I would do back then when I did these schedules was I said, I pull the calendar on the 15th, and there's no guarantee I'm going to give you anything off the next month after that date. You can email me, and if I can squeeze it in, then that's fine. But and just like Micah there saying, a lot of the bigger libraries will give you a 90-day. Some will give you 6 months. The library I worked in had 12 branches, and they would give you 6 months. But it really, a lot of times, it's case by case, because sometimes a staff member may need to book an international trip if they're traveling, and you have to book those 10 months in advance to get the best prices. So I think that's another one of those, like all of these, that it's really hard to really pin down a good answer that works for everybody. Good question. So the way that I usually developed my schedules was I'd have this schedule, which I would call kind of the staff schedule, that would tell me who's off when, who wants to be off when. If I approved it, there's no fighting over holidays, that kind of thing, because I also would put everyone on a holiday rotation. So if, for example, a certain staff member got spring break off one year, then they would not be priority for the next year. And it just solves a lot of problems, because the way it works in a lot of places is like everyone wants off that week, and a lot of times people will just say seniority, but then that causes anger if the same person gets off, that week every year. I'd say it's a good idea to be firm about how the schedule works, and you have the room to be flexible as well, but stick to them with the appropriate exceptions. For example, if those 2 people needed off that Friday and I gave them off and I said no more requests, I know when on this schedule I knew that I could handle really one more person maybe being off that day for the entire branch, but I put it on there because I knew Fridays are the day, a lot of people get sick, a lot of people need off last minute, you never know. So you kind of want to build into your schedule, if possible, a little bit of a buffer as well. even if you have a small department branch, now if it's 2 people, this probably wouldn't make sense, but even if you have 5 people, consider a desk schedule. And this goes back to sort of what we were talking about earlier about how your staff members, sometimes you have that, everyone's like, oh, we just pitch in and we do everything. And they'll almost feel insulted when you first introduce the idea of a desk schedule, because they'll say, oh, are you saying that we just don't do stuff on our own and, we won't take care of it? And I always just tell people it's not about that. It's about, giving you guys the time you need, because at the first branch that I started working with desk schedules, we found, and they were using a kind of a different version of a desk schedule, but I introduced the Gantt chart kind of desk schedule. We pulled 40 hours a week out of there. We had a staff of 10 that worked the desk, and we were able to pull 40 extra hours a week just by reorganizing the time a little bit. So even if you only have a few people, you'll be surprised how you may be able to rearrange your time a little bit by having it hands-on and very visual like this. So the bottom example of a desk schedule on here is something that I have seen way more at libraries when they use a desk schedule. It's the kind where you have the hours and they just tell people where they're going to be, and then the rest of it, they do whatever. I really love the top one. It's a Gantt chart. And the reason I do is because you move your staff members every hour. And what I have found is that by using a desk schedule like this, you can, A, build in everything from roving. I found at one of the places that I worked that if I assign people to rove with a checklist, that it super duper increased the neatness of the library. We made sure that every little thing was done during that, throughout the day. They helped a lot of patrons in the stacks. It was very great. So you can add anything in. If, for example, here we do our own shelving, you could add shelving into there. But then you can also give all your staff, including the ones that are only on the desk all the time, an hour off the desk now and then to do some training. You can require some kind of training. Say, even your desk staff could do one training a quarter, and they feel like you care. They know that you care about what they're learning. They always have the people that are like, I just want to come in here and do. But encourage it. Make sure it's required for everybody, that you're using the same kind of information for everybody. But you build this in. You build in your programs. You build in whether they're leaving, coming. If there's a special project, you can throw it in. On this one, I would highlight who the person in charge was. So you can see George would be the person in charge this day. And that's also important because a lot of times if you have 2 people who have the same seniority, and then if some event happens, they maybe don't know who's supposed to do what. But basically, if any problems come up, you can build them right into the system. And here's just a kind of a regular Excel type schedule. I would use this to base off the desk schedule. I would create this schedule and then move it over. If I change somebody's hours from their normal hours, I would highlight it in red. Once again, I've noticed in the past, I've explored a lot of and talked to a lot of people and asked them to see their schedules. And I've noticed in the past a lot of people will have a lot of random markings. They'll have a lot of unnecessary information on the schedule that's going to their staff, stuff that confuses their staff. So what I do with this one is all that information I hide before I would release it to the staff, so that the staff members that were extra curious could unhide it and see all those details, but the ones who didn't, which was 90% of them, could just see the important information that they needed. So my kind of, I guess, motto on these kinds of things is if a stranger can't come in, if a sub can't come in, if someone from another branch can't come in and just look at your schedule and know how to read it, then maybe it's a little too complicated. And the other thing is I think that that's a good thing to do with all of your paperwork. Look at all your paperwork. If it's too complicated, if your systems are too complicated, if you can't explain it in a short cheat sheet, then, that you could hand to a sub really quick, then it might be something that needs to be reevaluated and streamlined. So one of the greatest things I've ever found in getting staff invested, but also one of the greatest things I've ever found in dismantling the grapevine and dismantling the gossip stream, is actually requiring staff to do a monthly report. Now, it's simple, it's quick, but in this monthly report, that's their one-stop shop. This is their one-stop shop to know what you want from them. I found if you tell staff directly what you want from them, even if at first they're not invested and they feel like insulted, eventually they will be so happy because they will be secure in knowing that they are doing exactly what you want them to do. A lot of times I notice staff will say, I just want to make sure I'm doing what you want me to. I just want to make sure, and I'm like, I want you to do this, this, and this. Keep it clear. Keep what your expectations are very clear. Even write them down. Have those individual meetings with them every quarter if possible, and to kind of prepare you for those bigger ones, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So some of the things I've done in the past, and you could do some of these or all of these. This is actually an example of an actual staff monthly report that I required at one of the branches I worked at. So you want to find that sweet spot with your staff. You want them to have enough to do to keep that grapevine under control, because if they have too much time to sit around and it's quiet between and they don't have anything to do in between patrons, you better believe a bunch of interesting things that may or may not have to do with anything actually going on at the library will start coming out. But you don't want to give them so much that they're stressed out. So one way that I have approached this is to give them different assignments. And it solves a ton of problems. So let's get started with this. First, one of the things that I like to do is assign them just an area in the library that they have to keep straight. Now, we have cleaners that come in and do stuff, but they aren't going to be straightening books or reorganizing the circulation desk. That's, our job. So every year I would rotate it through for all the clerks, that they would have different parts of the staff area or the patron areas that they needed to keep straightened up. And here on the list, all they have to do is click the box. This would once again go for a whole year. I could just open the document, run through it. I could look at all the staff in less than 10 minutes at the end of the month. Now, some of them would have different assignments and stuff, so I could keep it. If I had an assistant who did programming or something, then there would be a whole section on programming, so they could talk about that. But also, they feel heard. You actually can go back and you're chatting with them about something from their monthly report, and they're very excited because they know you listen and that you're really hands-on with what you're doing. Build into your own schedule to send out an email every month that goes to all staff that says, don't forget to fill in your monthly report. Now, you can do anything from having a staff book club. We would do a genre-based book club. So in between patrons, I did allow, if they were caught up with all their other work, they could read an ebook on the computer as long as patrons weren't neglected. And the reason I did that is because they were reading that ebook, they weren't gossiping. And I will tell you, it worked so well. They took care of their patrons, they got all of their work done, and when they were done, basically they would read that ebook on there, they'd still help the staff, they'd write a book review, we'd post those book reviews to the patrons. So not only did they, and then they were required to read all their other staff. We did a genre base, so say in January we'd all read a mystery book, and in February we'd all read a Western, and in March we'd all read children's books. That way they got to read about a ton of books to help their reader advisory, but they weren't gossiping between assignments or between patrons. And I did it as a genre base so they could pick their own books, so those people who don't love reading could read a 50-page book, and those people who loved reading could read a 1,000-page book. And this worked so well that every place I've implemented it, when I left and the new manager came in and said they didn't have to do it anymore, they still did it anyway. It's a very great thing to do. So anything like that, and it doesn't have to be that, it can be self-guided training, it can be training that you assign, anything that gets them more invested than just feeling like that they're a body at the desk. And then giving them a way to express it. Like I said, in here, I would just give them a list. Every little thing, they had messy desks all the time at a certain place I put in. Make sure you straighten up your cubby or your desk area once a month. It wasn't too much, and then I based their cleaning assignments and all that based on how often they work. So if someone worked 20 hours, they didn't have as many assignments as someone who worked 40 hours. So you can also build into your own personal calendars program observations. If you are a branch manager, you probably want to do this, or a department head, you probably want to do this at least every 3 to 6 months based on, I guess, how many staff members you have, just to make sure, once again, that your staff member and you are on the same page with where you want your programs to be. And tracking your performance issues, once again, day to day, a great way to do this is just to keep an ongoing log of your interactions with each of your staff members. It sounds like a lot of work, and once again, it's one of those things where it's a lot of work to get to the end of the year and not really remember much about your interactions with that staff member. But you know there was some stuff that happened, but you don't quite remember what it was. And once again, I'm happy to send you guys some examples of what a program observation spreadsheet or a performance spreadsheet would be. Managing space is always important. Make sure that you are keeping your desk and office, your branch and department clean. As we talked about earlier, kind of go through, find those things that are not just maintenance errors or maintenance things that need to be fixed, but also, is your space being used efficiently? Is there a certain place that patrons are always sitting? Build this into your calendar, and as I said earlier, always bring someone else with you. Manage your digital space. Build it into your calendar annually to clean out your folders. If there is any item, like say you have Square or a cash register, make sure that you always have really easy to use instructions for uncommon situations, or just the regular, like ringing up some cash in case you have a substitute and maybe theirs is a little different. Now, how can you get started with all of this? Start with your own organization system and work outward. It's going to be hard to implement organization for other people if you struggle with it yourself. Make sure you evaluate your to-do list, evaluate your email systems. And I will tell you, I always, nowadays, because of the system, not before, I always am following up on stuff, and people really appreciate the fact that you care enough to follow up. So, for example, if there's something I need to do, and like I touch base on with a staff member about something, and I say, you know what, I want to make sure I follow up, I just put it into my to-do list log that in 2 weeks I check with them. And boy, does it show. They can tell that you really care. So start with your own organization system. Then go through your branch, as we talked about. Write down everything that needs to be done and any other big ideas, and have someone else do it too. Pick the organization projects you want to implement and then prioritize them. If it takes less than 2 minutes, use the Pomodoro method. Just go ahead and do it. Take longer to put it on the list anyway. Start with the area that are most visible to patrons and work outwards. Start delegating your tasks with deadlines. Mark the due dates on your log or calendar. Follow up with all your staff members. Once they see that you do follow up, they're way more likely to finish the tasks without you needing to help them. Because what happens at first, especially if you haven't implemented it at first, is you'll tell them and they'll be like, yeah, I'll do that. But then if their system isn't together, they won't remember. And that's a good thing, too. If you have time, offer to mentor your staff as well, because that's a great way to do it. Or mentor one person and put them in charge of mentoring your staff when it comes to time management. Capture your ideas and your staff's ideas by starting an idea list, and always practice awareness. There's always great ideas coming to you all the time. Just make sure that as you're practicing that awareness, you actually capture those ideas as they come to you. And here are some references. These are all some great things that you can go to for more information on time management. And I really, really love that Time Management Fundamentals by Dave Crenshaw. He's full of great ideas, but all the rest of them are great as well. If you have any information or want any of the templates that I have shown you in here, or have any other ideas on how to improve time management, please just let me know. Does anyone else have any questions?
Okay, Sandra, this is Charlie. I'll go ahead and sort of wrap up while I see a couple people are typing. If you have any more questions for Sandra, go ahead and chat those in, and we can get to those here in just a second. When I finish wrapping up my final slides. We need to extend our thanks to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for their sponsorship of this webinar and so many of our services that we provide here at KDLA. And please follow us on social media if you don't already, on Twitter or Facebook, or both. And here are some of our upcoming webinars for the month of April. It's a little bit lighter month with KPLA, but you can see we have a great variety. And some of these have not yet been announced on the listserv, so you can be one of the first people to sign up for them. Okay, and just a few things to remember. The webinar was recorded, so you can come back and review any of this great information that Sandra shared, or share it with your staff. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it will be posted within a week's time on our archived webinars page. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the survey about today's webinar. It's a quick 5-question survey. I'm opening it up in a separate window on everybody's individual screen. If you would please take a second and fill that out. And if you're watching the recording, please go ahead and fill the survey out as well. And if you'd like to go ahead and download a copy of Sandra's slides, you can get those down in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And haven't seen any more questions come in, but it looks like we might have some people interested in your templates. If you'd be willing to provide those, I'm happy to email those out, or people want to contact you directly, whatever is easiest for you, Sandra.
Yeah, I can just email them to you, Charlie, and then that way you can send them out, and people can either put them in their in-process box or get rid of them. It's fine.
Perfect. Yes, the idea of the empty inbox is my never-ending quest.
You can use that same concept of the email inbox in your physical life too. You can have an actual box. Dave Crenshaw talks about this, of physical items that you need to process, and then sit down once a week and process them. So you have a pile of physical paperwork. So it's just a great concept.
Excellent. I need to look into that one. I'm not too bad at electronic stuff, but it's the paper that gets me buried down. So
I used to keep a 3-tiered, I guess, file, and it had process, in process, and to file. And that worked really, really well. But now I just use, because most of my stuff is digital nowadays, I just use a single folder that I process each week. But it is great because you never feel stressed out that there's missing Post-it notes floating around with important information, which is really a problem for me in the past. I like banned Post-it notes from my office for the most part. My personal office. No, everyone else can use them if they want, but.
They're dangerous little things. You never know. They'll fall behind the radiator. You'll never see them again. No idea.
Yeah, all my little, I used to be a Post-it note crazy person. Like, I just have them everywhere, and I'd be like, oh, I have to process these Post-it notes. So.
All right. Well, we can stick around for another minute or so, but not seeing any more questions coming in, but lots of good feedback. So thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing what you've learned over the years in building your time management techniques with us. We really appreciate your time on this.
Well, thank everyone so much. And like I said, if you guys think of anything later, just shoot me an email. And I'll be happy, or call me. I'd be happy to discuss it. I'm always looking to learn new techniques and stuff too. And this really is a combination of absorbing stuff I've learned and just being around great managers and stuff who were very organized and kind of rubbed off on me. So thank you guys so much.
Excellent. And yes, Beth, we'll get those templates out when I send out the follow-up email with everybody's certificates. So we'll get that out to you in the next day or so. Thank you all for attending today. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you again in the future. And Sandra, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.